Hello there, and welcome to this webinar, which will introduce the UK EdTech sector. This webinar has been produced in partnership with IE Singapore to support the Singaporean businesses entering the UK marketplace. Firstly, we're going to take a look at the education sector more generally, before moving on to look at the technology used in the sector and where you can fit in. Let's start with some essentials. Firstly, everyone is eligible for free schooling in the UK. There are no costs for stationery, books or equipment used in schools. Education is, however, compulsory. It can also be an apprenticeship, part-time education or training, as well as being employed, self-employed or volunteering for more than 20 hours a week. All of this qualifies as being in education and is a shift from previous definitions which essentially meant being in school, college or university. Most children progress to secondary school at age 11, and the vast proportion of secondary schools do not select pupils on the grounds of ability. The UK has 4 distinct regional education systems in England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. Responsibility has been delegated to individual parliaments or national assemblies. There is broadly a unified approach, but there are some differences. For example, the national curriculum is taught with regional variations, for example in Welsh medium schools. Scotland has its own education system and examination system and follows a completely different curriculum, which is currently being reviewed. These are just some of the examples of different practices within the UK, but in general there is a relatively unified approach. There are a wealth of statistics about the UK education sector here, and it should give you an idea of the size and scale of the sector. Each have their own ways of operating and, of course, procuring goods and services. Sure Start Centres were an initiative set up by the 1998 Labour government to specifically target children in areas of deprivation to improve childcare, early education, health and family support, with an emphasis on outreach and community development. Special schools are there to support those with special educational needs who may not have the support that would help them most in conventional schools. PRU stands for Pupil Referral Unit and is for children who typically would be displaying emotional and behavioural difficulties, exasperated by unsettled domestic situations, a propensity towards criminal behaviour, bullying, or, conversely, having been the victim of bullying. This stops them from being able to fully benefit from or contribute to the regular school system. As you can see, the sector is both large and diverse, which provides an excellent opportunity for your businesses to supply goods and services into one of these sectors. So, who is in charge? Well, overall, it's the Secretary of State for Education, Nicky Morgan, who has taken over from Michael Gove. Michael Gove divided opinion, with some believing that his tough stance was pragmatic and necessary to raise standards, and others believing it was ideologically driven and not in the best interest of schools or pupils. Either way, Nicky Morgan has taken a more conciliatory stance, which has helped to calm some of the difficulties that had existed in the sector. Underneath the DFE, there are a number of different governmental or quasi-governmental organisations that help to monitor and manage the school system. It is unlikely that any of them will be direct customers, but it's important to understand the impact that some of them have, because the changes they make could create opportunities or threats for your product. There have been a significant growth in the number of academies since the Conservatives first came into office in 2010. In fact, all secondary schools could become academies by the end of this Parliament, possibly at least half of primaries too. Free schools have been a major new initiative by the government with the intention of giving decision-making to parents rather than central government or local authorities. 24 have opened up and they are growing in number. UTCs are a new concept in education. They offer 14 to 19-year-olds opportunities to take highly regarded, full-time, technically orientated courses of study. Sponsored by a university, they offer clear progression routes into higher education or further learning and work. National curriculum requirements are integrated with technical and vocational elements. Their college ethos and curriculum is heavily emphasised by local and national employers. UTCs have around 600 students and it is hoped that by 2016, 30,000 students will benefit from them. Studio schools are a new type of state school model designed to help to equip young people with the knowledge, skills and experiences they need to succeed in life and work. For 14 to 90-year-olds, studio schools will have an emphasis on learning involving enterprise projects and real work. There are currently over 40 of them, and the heart of studio schools are 7 essential elements developed in consultation with employers. 1. Employability and enterprise skills. 2. Key qualifications. 3. Personalised curriculum. 4. Practical learning. 5. Real work. 6. Small schools. 7. Students of all abilities. Students will learn the national curriculum through enterprise projects. The government is looking to set up over 100 in the coming years. If rated outstanding, you can become a teaching school. The model is to have a national network of teaching schools. They will take leading responsibility for supporting and assuring initial teacher training and professional development and leadership for teachers and leaders in the area. Most people agree that in the future there will be a close relationship between academies and their local teaching school, with the teaching school likely to be at the hub. It may help to have a little more detail on academies and free schools, which are really changing the face of education system in the UK. Both are different in the way they operate and have their own opportunities and challenges to supply into. Overall, however, they mark a distinct shift in power and decision making away from local authorities and to individual schools. We'll come on to discuss the implications of this in the next part of the presentation. There are some key economic and policy trends which are important to note. The first is that the government has refocused on traditional core subjects of literacy and numeracy, whilst at the same time raising the emphasis on computing. These all offer opportunity, and we will talk more about computing later. School spending is always important politically, not just because it forms the bedrock of our long-term sustainability, but because it's a vote winner. As the country exits the last recession, there is increased confidence within the school sector regarding spending. Another key trend is that school populations are rising, mainly due to the UK's rising population, which puts pressure on infrastructure. This itself gives the potential for companies to support schools to manage the population more efficiently and effectively, but does also require continued investment. A focus on the quality of teaching has been a driving force of the government. This has been very contentious regarding the desire to link pay to performance. The government argues that this will increase standards, but many teachers and unions argue that it is impossible to effectively set targets for many teachers. For example, those who work with the most disadvantaged or challenging children. At the same time, there is also a growing school of thought that teaching should be learned in a classroom and not in a college, which may offer some room for growth for technology to support this. Finally, school monitoring assessment has changed. Probably the biggest change is the removal of Ofsted of the satisfactory rating of schools which they assess, replacing it with the requires improvement category. This shift is supposed to demonstrate that anything less than good isn't good enough, and schools have a set period of time to demonstrate the required improvement has been made. Now you hopefully have a better understanding of the wider education context, we can look at how technology is being used in the sector. First and foremost, it's important to understand that there is a balance to be struck between the benefits of technology as an enabler and enhancer of learning being maximised, whilst not seeking for it to be a replacement for quality teaching. Just having technology is not enough. Teachers still need to teach and use it as one of the many tools in their box. But teachers too also need support to learn how to effectively use the tech in the classroom, and we'll come on to discuss this later. Technology has seen 50 years of rapid development. Schools have struggled sometimes to keep up with the development of computers, the internet, interactive whiteboards and gadgets, and increasingly, tablets and smartphones. Computing was first introduced into the curriculum in the 1980s, and the government has, over subsequent years, advocated and supported the use of technology in schools. Schools have also prioritised their spending at key points to take advantage of new technologies and initiatives on offer. This was most noticeable under the previous government, when there was a push for computers, interactive whiteboards, and virtual learning environments. Inevitably, this expenditure was not going to be forever, and, as the essentials were required and budget squeezed, spending on technology reduced. Schools were reluctant to replace aging hardware in a bid to meet targets and reduce expenditure. In recent years, the trend has been reversed. despite the removal of government funding designated for IT-related use. Although students may not have greater fluency in using technology, it cannot be questioned that the current generation of school children have grown up in a world where technology is embedded in their lives. Together with government initiatives, this has fostered a culture of digital learning that has facilitated the growth of companies specializing in providing digital resources and software to schools. With the advent of YouTube, Wikipedia, and the increased efficiency of search engines, teaching challenges have changed. From one of how to access information with the use of technology, to how to control it and help students to understand what can be an overwhelming amount of information. Various pockets of funding are available to schools, with perhaps the most significant recent addition being Pupil Premium, an initiative designed to help raise the attainment and close the gap between disadvantaged pupils and their peers. Pupil Premium funding redirects core education funding towards schools with higher levels of children who have in the last 6 years been eligible for free school meals. It has been credited by some for a significant boost in spending on EdTech. Despite this, however, in many cases it is actually used for staffing and other areas that would have been funded anyway, so it may not offer the great source of investment that many suppliers might hope. At the same time, parental expectations have evolved with the consumerization of society. We now expect information when we want it, and parents now expect schools and teachers to be available when it is convenient for them. Therefore, there is a changing role for technology in providing information about schools and pupils, albeit with data protection issues. The total value of the UK education market is just short of 40 billion in 2015 to 16. The total value of the UK education resources market is anywhere from 1.6 billion to 2.4 billion. This is because 80% of schools' costs and expenditure would typically go on teaching staff. Then 14 to 16% is spent on energy costs, buildings and maintenance, pensions, licenses, etc. This leaves only 4 to 6% on educational resources, but that is still quite a large spend. Within that spend, there is roughly a 50-50 split between primary and secondary education, but as you might expect, secondary schools have a significantly larger budget per school. This spending is set to rise year on year, which is good news for suppliers. The government's attention to IT pre-2010 had driven considerable change, but it had focused on school-level approaches such as VLEs or on interactive whiteboards for classrooms, as previously mentioned. These are purchased only at intervals of several years, so once these were in place, schools had little need to reinvest. Since 2010, there has been renewed interest, this time in personal devices, as wireless has grown and laptops, or more generally tablet PCs, have captured teachers' imaginations. These devices are much better suited to classroom use than suites of PCs, and there has been a clear move in this direction that has driven spending increases. Despite this, however, spending per pupil is actually set to decrease. In a 2011 report on trends in education and school spending by the Institute of Fiscal Studies, the fall in education spending as a percentage of per capita income between 2010 and 2015 was predicted to be the largest since the 1950s. The increase in the school-age population, alongside the extended time for 16 to 18-year-olds to remain in education, suggests that resources per head will decline even more over time. It's important to note, however, that spending in real terms is set to increase. So although for parents the lower resources per capita will be of a real concern, for suppliers there is a continued and increasing opportunity. Having steadily grown their desktop provision to provide suites of PCs in many classrooms, around 5 years ago, schools made a noticeable move towards laptops. 2010 was the first year in which the number of desktop computers started to decline. Then, as tablet PCs, notably iPads, started to become popular with the general public, schools, which perhaps lagged behind by a couple of years, began to move towards adopting them too. Greater wireless access was required in schools in order to make use of tablets, and schools needed a few years to put this in place. However, wireless access is now much more prevalent, and while still not complete, schools are often complex structures spread over many buildings, teachers are beginning to have confidence that they can access networks more reliably. Since 2012, the growth of tablets has been mirrored by a reduction in desktops and laptops, and tablets now account for around 25% of devices in use in schools, with primary slightly less, but gaining ground. Primary schools are a more fertile ground for the growth of tablets because, as mentioned above, they tend to be less locked into existing desktop suites than secondary schools. Wireless provision is proportionally easier and cheaper, and most importantly of all, it's easy to see the benefits of using tablets in the classroom. Although tablets, like any other previous technology, could come and go, it seems that they are set to stay for some time. They offer greater familiarity than interactive whiteboards, more engagement than virtual learning environments, and offer more potential for integrating IT into learning than any other previous tech. At the same time, they also overcome an issue, that vertical screens of laptops and desktops are a physical barrier between teacher and pupil. The interactive whiteboard craze did not deliver the positive benefits that many had hoped, for multiple reasons. It does appear, however, that they could be set for a renaissance due to a new generation of software which will enable better integration of interactive whiteboards and mobile devices. This could overcome one of the main criticisms of their use, which is that they encourage too great an emphasis on front-of-class teaching. With recent wholesale revisions to the entire curriculum in English schools, it might be expected that there would currently be a major demand for new content, yet there is not, digital or otherwise. Certainly, schools anticipate that they will at some stage need to update resources to reflect changes, but despite all the angst surrounding government reforms, they will largely carry on as they were, teaching much the same content to much the same level. A more significant reform is the process of assessment, significant not only for the teachers having to come to terms with the removal of national curriculum levels, but also in that digital software offers some potential for supporting teachers to do so. Many publishers looking at developing such products, but schools are not necessarily looking for them because they tend to think that a very high degree of need for personalization and flexibility would hinder their development. So, while this seems to offer the most scope for significant market growth, it is likely to be very fragmented, with individual products perhaps finding a toehold in specific segments. When asked, apps are a top priority for teachers. This may seem odd, since tablets account for only 25% of devices, but it indicates the level of importance teachers see in a mobile device for the future. At present, there are still too few apps to support learning. Tablets tend to be used as a tool like they are at home, to take pictures, access the internet and the local network, etc. Yet teachers see the potential in tablets for delivering dedicated learning software. For example, e-books start to look as if they may become a suitable replacement for textbooks, if they can find their place between textbooks and drill and practice software. The remarkable success of MyMaths is largely down to the fact that it encourages students to complete tasks and supports teachers in assessment of progress. In other words, it enhances the kind of activities which have gone on in the classroom and at home for decades. Teachers, parents and children alike can easily see the benefits of systems such as these, and both schools and publishers would like to think that they can replicate the success with other resources in other subjects. However, there have been no such equivalents as yet, and when teachers are asked about their favourite education software, there is no clear winner. When asked what they would want from a software, there is also no clear answer. So it is probably going to continue to be the case that different titles bloom in popularity from time to time, and as tablet use grows, delivery by these devices becomes the dominant factor in software choice. Programs that develop pupil skills through gaming are becoming increasingly popular because they capitalize on the benefits of engagement and interest. These games are intended to deliver a blended learning experience of video, games, audio, and animation. Whilst they do remain a popular choice for schools, critics are concerned that pupils learn to succeed at the game rather than developing their broader skills and understanding, and this is something that needs to be considered for developers. While elsewhere in society there has been a digital revolution, in schools this has been more of an evolution. They still lag behind business in terms of provision, expertise and technical support, but there has been a marked change in the last 3 years. The changes in the 2014 national curriculum regarding IT and coding may well bring about this revolution, however, with revised learning outcomes for pupils. For primary schools in particular, these changes seem daunting. Among the new requirements for primary schools include understanding what algorithms are, creating and debugging simple programs, and using logical reasoning to predict the behavior of simple programs. To ensure that these new requirements can be met, schools have taken on the task of reviewing their hardware or software provision to ensure that it accommodates the new objectives, particularly those relating to coding and programming. It is unsurprising that some schools have found these challenges difficult to assimilate, given the lack of central support on the strategic development of IT, which is an ongoing issue in schools. The curriculum changes will have undoubtedly led to increased spending on hardware, software, and staff CPD. Primary schools have forecasted a 10% increase in IT investment in 2014-15, and secondary schools forecasted an 11% increase. Other changes, however, include considerations for how schools could use mobile technology to enhance non-teaching activities such as school management, which could be an area of growth. At the same time, teachers want to be able to access valuable information as they move around the school. This could be, for example, to see latest attendance, achievement, or behaviour data in a few taps. The goal would be to instantly find out that day's attendance figures, for example, or compare this week's and last week's negative or positive behaviour statistics at the swipe of a finger. Instant access to the details about a group of students they want to pay more attention to, such as pupil premium children or those on free school meals, could also make a massive difference to the efficiency and positive outcomes within the school. Increased mobile usage could, for example, allow staff to take a register in the classroom or on the sports field. Additionally, it could provide a quick and easy method of recording when a student has been given permission to leave the class. This means accurate attendance data and keeping everything in order under the school's safeguarding requirements. Furthermore, accessing timetables and homework diaries in real time, as well as details of attendance and achievements, would give students more responsibility for their own progress, which could lead to increased motivation. As has previously been mentioned though, training is key to make the most of technology. This is something that is growing awareness of and something that will offer opportunities for suppliers to add value to their own services by giving excellent training and aftercare packages to differentiate themselves. Another trend sweeping the education sector is a focus on science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, STEM subjects. Research shows that in line with government's shift towards more practical learning activities in the new science curriculum, 75% of schools are prioritising science over other core subjects. Some 89% of primary and 94% of secondary schools are more interested in science than in previous years, and, in turn, investment in supporting resources is set to increase. The rapid growth of academies, especially in the secondary phase of education, has reduced the power of most local authorities to support consortium purchasing. This has affected primary schools in particular, as they do not have enough staff to spend the time running a protracted procurement process, and consortium purchasing is difficult to achieve unless the school can join an existing cluster, many of which have appeared in the last 2 or 3 years. Prior to the coalition government's policy to devolve funds to schools, local authorities had considerably more input into their procurement and ordering decisions. This has dropped dramatically by 43% since 2010, as schools have been given far greater control of their budgets, and many have become academies. More individual purchasing is a positive on the one hand for suppliers, as it means that decision makers are easier to reach and contracts easier to win. But the downside is that it's harder to market to a far larger number of potential customers, and also more difficult to achieve larger orders than a consortium would have given. The result of the devolved funding is that most decisions regarding IT purchasing are now made in-house by either the senior management team, an IT expert, or the IT department. This has fallen under intense criticism, with many raising questions about the school's ability to make IT purchasing decisions, given the lack of information and support available. Cluster purchasing is more prevalent in primary schools as a result, though often secondary schools are involved in the same clusters. Many IT providers now target these cluster organizations for their sales and marketing initiatives, but they are very diverse, dispersed, and difficult to reach, adding considerably to the cost of sales compared to the previous local authority-based approaches. The Department for Education is currently effectively recommending the Crescent Purchasing Consortium as a national online service to support this approach. Almost 3,000 organisations have joined, and it's very likely to grow, particularly in areas, mostly outside London, where local authorities can no longer support consortium purchasing. When teachers were asked in a recent survey what they would like tablets to offer more of, they said compatibility, group functionality, apps, design features, and lower cost. This reveals that schools want tablets that are affordable, flexible, multi-platform, and multifunctional. Ultimately, they want excellent value for money, and products that fail to offer this are less likely to be seen as worthwhile investments. The difficulty lies with the disparity between the value for money that the most up-to-date devices can offer and the very high expectations that schools have. A number of schools which provide students with a tablet now expect a regular contribution from parents to cover some of the cost. This is one way that schools are overcoming the tight budgets, while still providing opportunities to benefit from one-to-one device availability. This can be controversial, however, as parents are often unsure as to the extent to which these devices get used in the class for specific educational functions. Finally, schools have become much more ready to purchase software by subscription, and wireless internet access in schools has become much more reliable. This is likely to be a growth area as existing provision becomes redundant and the cost of a large-scale replacement is pressured by reduced school budgets. There are a very wide range of potential stakeholders, influencers, and decision makers for products and services. Who makes what decision is open to a number of different variables, such as what is the education establishment, school or university, primary or secondary, state-funded or independent. All of these have different ways of making decisions. The product itself will have an impact on decision making. The more investment required or the newer the technology, the more likely it is to need to pass through different layers of decision making. As has been mentioned, government is taking a far smaller role in making decisions, but they are nonetheless a stakeholder, as is Ofsted, as inspections may well comment on the use of the technology. For larger IT purchases, it is quite likely that a head of department, head teacher, or member of the senior management team may be the decision maker. If so, they will often be aided by an IT coordinator, network manager, or specialist. When you look closely at the detail, however, it may often be the case that at departmental level, the head of department is the coordinator, and the whole team will need to arrive at a consensus to make a decision. The initial driver for trialling or looking at a project is quite often the teachers themselves. An individual teacher may have heard about a product from a teacher at another school or seen it at BET. They then report back and become an internal advocate for the technology. This is certainly one of the main reasons teachers attend BET, and they often have a specific remit to look at particular types of technology to feed back their findings. So marketing needs to address the needs of the teachers and, where possible, give targeted messages to the right teachers about what they are interested in. School business managers are a relatively new role that have gained real traction in the sector. Their roles have been created to try and help the schools to operate and buy more efficiently. Particularly in academies, they are seen as an important decision maker and may be part of the senior management team. They are definitely important to build relationships with, even if they do not make the decisions on their own. At the same time, it's always worth making sure you don't forget the end users, the children and their parents. Particularly with technology, which is user-facing, unlike network solutions, for example, they have to enjoy using them and it must enhance their learning. Ultimately, they are the main stakeholder for any trial, and if they don't get on with using the product, it probably won't be bought by the school. The sudden growth in broadband and hence cloud-based software has shifted the emphasis away from the need for virtual learning environments as a portal to educational software, and instead they are mostly used to share information which would previously have been achieved on paper. In other words, their use has shifted from teaching to an administrative functionality. Worryingly, a digital divide in ICT use is occurring in schools across the UK, which is apparent between schools in rural and urban areas. The source of the divide appears to be the limited access to broadband, with the associated effect on wireless networking and, in turn, adoption of new tablet technology. Rurally located schools that stated they have less than 30% of bandwidth and Wi-Fi requirements also confirmed that they forecast a low adoption of tablet computers. On average, 36.5% of pupil-facing computers will be tablets by 2016, but schools based in rural areas forecast that only 10% of pupil-facing computers will be tablets by the same time. This is a significant difference. It's easy to realise the amount that can be wasted if schools don't consider the total cost of ownership of devices and IT. At the most basic level, this can be equated to the idea of a school feeling it is saving £5 by buying a box of value felt tip pens, most of which might not work or may stop working after the first day. IT purchasing is no different. Instead, it is important to consider added value. Does the product price come with a warranty, and, if so, for how long? When something is faulty, do you have to package it up, return it to the supplier, and manage without it for a few weeks? Alternatively, will the supplier come in and replace it? In terms of hardware, this could pose a challenge to smaller international companies who may find it more difficult to provide a replacement service. On the flip side, however, it is always easier for smaller organizations to provide personalized customer care, which is highly valued when making purchasing decisions. Mistakes have been made and learned from in the past. For example, the government's interactive whiteboard framework agreement, where the hardware was sold on the basis of lowest price. As a result, the substantive training was diluted down to the very basic instruction of plugging in and switching on. Interactive whiteboards were therefore purchased without teachers being trained to use them and, not surprisingly, they got used as glorified projector screens. As has been mentioned, wireless technology is a massive enabler for all education establishments and was initially slow to grow given the dominance of desktop computers and the difficulty of giving reliable coverage. However, the increasing appeal of mobile technology and devices necessitated a shift, and by 2005, 31% of primary schools and 55% of secondary schools owned wireless networking technology. This has significantly increased since then and needs to continue to grow in order to facilitate the growth of other technology. Currently, the majority of schools do not allow devices from home in the classroom. This is likely to change in the near future, however, given the diverse and increasing pressures placed on school budgets. Some schools are turning to this relatively new possibility by placing the responsibility on parents to buy a device that their children can use for school, a tablet or a smartphone, for example. Unsurprisingly, this is an appealing option for schools who are struggling to provide a sufficient number of devices to meet their needs. The Bring Your Own Device scheme does have some disadvantages though, such as excluding disadvantaged pupils, a wide variety of devices being used, and health and safety regulations. Ultimately, how to increase technology in schools with tight budgets continues to be a key issue, and Bring Your Own Devices is one of a number of ways this could be tackled. After all this information on the UK market, what does it actually mean for your business? Well, firstly, it's a great time to target the UK. EdTech spending is growing overall, teachers and schools are looking for new solutions, and in many segments there are no dominant players. Despite the large amounts of change that have happened and continue to happen in the sector, there is much opportunity to be had. Can you adapt your offering or your marketing to target the area of greatest potential need for schools? If so, then you may be able to do very well. And once you've got a foothold, word of mouth referral is particularly strong in the sector between teachers. It is, however, a very large and diverse marketplace. If it is targeted in a loose or unfocused way, or you do not really concentrate on seeking to be successful in one area, you may end up spending time and effort with little reward. It is unlikely that suppliers will be able to have a product that is suitable for everyone, so you need to concentrate on where you are likely to have the greatest success. Once you've decided that, you do need to try to have a consistent presence in order to be at the forefront of the minds of decision makers when they want to make a change. You can't be here in person all the time, but carefully considering your marketing approach and relationship building can maximise your perceived presence. At the same time, while size can be seen as a disadvantage, it can also be a considerable advantage. It allows you to quickly adapt to changing market conditions and, perhaps most importantly, offer superb customer service. This personalised training and after-sales support can be more difficult for larger companies to implement, but as has been mentioned a number of times during the presentation, these are highly valued by end users and can really tip the balance in your favour. Finally, schools and the public sector in the UK do tend to be quite risk-averse when making decisions. The more expensive the technology, the greater the risk, and as a result, demonstrating that you are a low-risk, high-quality option that is exciting but also a safe pair of hands is very important. As with any new business transaction, and the UK is no different, it ultimately comes down to trust. Through working with IE Singapore and BET, we can help you to build that trust in the market, giving you a great platform from which to grow. Good luck. The information for this webinar was put together from a wide range of sources, including our own primary research, but it also leaned particularly on research conducted by BESA, with whom we work in partnership, and SchoolZone. BESA are the British Educational Suppliers Association and represent companies supplying products and services to the education sector in the UK and worldwide. SchoolZone is one of the UK's specialist school market research organisations. The information that they provide is always invaluable in understanding the UK market. We look forward to seeing you at BET.